Anatomy. What are the characteristics of viruses? You can describe viruses based on a number of features including what they look like, their shapes and size, genome properties, structural proteins and whether or not it has an envelope. Versus shapes. Viruses can look like very different from each other. Scientists often describe them by shapes. Types of viruses. Shapes include icohedral or polyhedral viruses. This is a geometrical shape with many sides, similar to a scoreball. Most viruses that infect people are icohedral. Helical. This virus shape looks like a cylinder. Its genetic information is copied up like a spring inside. Spherical viruses are helical or polyhedral viruses that have an envelope around them. They are shaped mostly like a ball. Complex. Complex viruses combine more than one shape. Viruses that infect bacterial have a polyhedral head connected to a helix body. Viruses size. All viruses are very small, too small to see without a strong microscope if you measure them. Under a microscope, most are between 20 nanometer to 400 nanometer. For comparison, the smallest viruses are about 2000 times smaller than a grain of sand. They are about 100 to 1000 times smaller than the cell in our body. But their size can vary a lot. For instance, the measles virus is about 5 times larger than Zika viruses. Viruses also have varying weights, molecular weight. Genomic properties of viruses. The information stored in the viruses, its genetic material is either DNA or RNA. DNA is like the instruction manual for how to build the viruses. Virus is like the translation of the instruction in a language that the cell machinery can read and make its protein. Viral DNA or RNA can be linear or circular, positive sense or negative sense. RNA that's positive sense can be used as an instruction to make more viruses parts without any additional shape steps. Negative sense RNA viruses need special proteins enzymes to create positive sense RNA before viruses can make more copies of themselves. This is also called plus strand or positive strands or minus strand or negative strand. Most DNA viruses are positive sense, single stranded or double stranded. DNA viruses can have their genetic material in a single string of instructions ssDNA or two sets that are paired together. DNA single strand, double stranded DNA. Human DNA is double stranded. RNA viruses are usually single stranded. So there are some double stranded RNA viruses. Structural proteins. The structural proteins of viruses make up the capsid or protecting coating. They can also make up the envelope if there is one and any structure that stick out from it, that it helps intercells, like the spike proteins of coronaviruses, or versus living or non-living. Viruses are not living organisms, but there is some debate over this. Generally, biologists do not consider viruses to be alive because they cannot perform the functions that living organisms do. For instance, they cannot convert food into energy, and they cannot live or reproduce without a host cell. On the other hand, they can reproduce in the right host cell and they evolve over time to survive. Plus, they can damage and destroy host cell to do so. Because of this, many consider them a gray area between living and non living things.